So have you noticed costs for, say, home renovations? They seem to just keep going up, right? Or maybe you've seen the headlines about lumber prices. They've been pretty high. And, the growing concern about wildfires every year. It feels like they get worse and worse.
Yeah, definitely seeing all of that.
Well, all these things, they kind of connect back to one key resource, timber. Today, we're doing a deep dive into a pretty significant presidential document that tries to tackle some of this. We're going to unpack Executive Order 14225. The title is Immediate Expansion of American Timber Production. It was signed back on March 1st, 2025, popped up in the Federal Register soon after. And it's basically, well, it's a plan for a big shift. It's a direct response to what the administration sees as a critical national issue. Our goal here is to break this government directive down into, plain English. We want you to understand its purpose, what changes it's actually pushing for, and who exactly is supposed to do what. Think of it as a shortcut, maybe, to getting informed on something that really does touch our economy, the environment, and even the cost of your next home project.
Absolutely, and it's fascinating just seeing how one single document, an executive order, tries to shift policy across, well, quite a few federal agencies, and it's got this dual focus, really hitting both economic targets and environmental management, especially around forests. It's a clear move to change how we approach these things.
Okay, let's unpack that. The order seems pretty clear. There's a big problem it wants to solve. From your perspective, what's the main driver here? Why did the administration feel this needed such a direct, high-level push right now?
Well, Section 1 of the order itself really lays out the groundwork. It spells out the problems as they see them and the big picture goal. It kicks off by saying that producing timber, lumber, paper, bioenergy, all that wood product stuff, it calls it timber production, is, quote, critical to our nation's well-being. It really emphasizes the role in things like construction and energy. So right away, it's connecting to everyday stuff, the wood in your house, the paper you use, maybe even some of your power.
Right, the basics.
Exactly. But it's not just the economy. It also brings in public safety pretty strongly. It points out that good forest management and wildfire risk reduction projects can save American lives and communities.
That hits home, especially with the recent fire seasons.
For sure. It draws a direct line between forest management and, well, keeping people safe. Now, here's the central argument, or maybe the grievance, in the order. It claims the U.S. has, and I'm quoting here, an abundance of timber resources, plenty of trees, but that heavy-handed federal policies have prevented full utilization. And this, the order argues, is why we end up relying on foreign producers for lumber and wood products.
Okay, heavy-handed policies. That's a pretty specific framing. How does that view blaming existing federal rules for holding back timber production? How does that usually sit in the broader debate about forests and timber?
That's a really important point because it shows the specific angle this order is taking. It's directly challenging the idea that maybe environmental regulations, things that limit logging or certain management activities on federal land, have gone too far. The order seems to argue that a lack of active management, like thinning or controlled burns, actually makes things worse. It suggests this leads to unhealthy forests, builds up fuel for huge wildfires, degrades habitats, and drives up costs.
So it's flipping the script a bit, saying more active management, including logging, is good for the environment.
In a way, yes. It reframes active management, including harvesting timber, as necessary for forest health, better habitats, and preventing those catastrophic fires. It's definitely a different take compared to some groups who might advocate for leaving forests more untouched. And the order lists the negative consequences it sees from current policies. It says they hurt job creation, make wildfires worse, harm fish and wildlife habitats, raise construction and energy costs, threaten economic security, and basically send jobs overseas because we import lumber. So the stated goal, the bottom line, is to reverse these policies and increase domestic timber production to boost national security, economic security, and cut down on imports.
Okay, so it's tying together the economy, jobs, safety, even national security, all through timber production. That's quite a bundle. Given that big goal, what actual actions does it tell federal agencies to take, and how fast are they supposed to move? That's where the rubber meets the road, right?
Exactly. And this is where the order gets very specific. It's not just stating intentions, it's handing out assignments with deadlines. The clock started ticking pretty much immediately after it was signed. So first up, within just 30 days, that's fast.
Very fast.
The Secretary of the Interior, who oversees the Bureau of Land Management, or BLM, and the Secretary of Agriculture for the U.S. Forest Service, USFS, they each had to issue new guidance. Guidance specifically aimed at boosting timber production and forest management activities. It mentions tools like the Good Neighbor Authority that lets federal agencies partner with states, tribes, and counties on forest projects, and stewardship contracting, where private companies might manage parts of a forest and get paid partly with the timber they harvest.
So finding more flexible ways to get work done on federal land.
That's the idea. More collaboration, maybe less federal bottlenecking. And they also had to suggest changes to laws if the current ones were seen as too limiting. It's about clearing pathways to get timber out faster.
Okay, 30 days. What's next?
Then, the timeline moves to 60 days. The focus shifts to environmental reviews, which are often seen as a major point of delay. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, under Interior, and NOAA Fisheries, under the Commerce Secretary, were tasked with creating a strategy specifically to speed up approvals for Forest Service and BLM projects under Section 7 of the Endangered Species Act, the ESA.
The Endangered Species Act. That's often a point of contention, isn't it? Balancing protection with development.
Precisely. And this order explicitly asks how to make that process faster. It raises that core question. How do you balance protecting species with the desire for quicker project approvals? The order clearly wants to accelerate things.
Got it. So 30 days for guidance, 60 days for speeding up ESA reviews. What happens after that?
Next deadline is 90 days. This one's pretty concrete. The Secretaries of Interior and Agriculture, together this time, had to give the president a plan. This plan needed to set a specific target, a number for the annual amount of timber to be offered for sale over the next 4 years from federal lands.
The sales target, measured how?
Measured in millions of board feet. So a very tangible, measurable goal to increase the supply coming off federal lands. It shows a clear push to ramp up production numbers.
Okay, that's direct. Any other specific actions called out?
Yes, there's one more fairly quick one. Within 120 days, they needed to complete a specific consultation. It's called the White Bark Pine Range-Wide Programmatic Consultation under Section 7 of the ESA.
White bark pine. Why single that one out?
It's likely an example of a large-scale, ongoing environmental review process that the administration wanted finished quickly. Maybe because it affects management across a wide area where those pines grow. Areas also potentially valuable for timber or needing wildfire mitigation. It just highlights the focus on pushing specific processes forward.
Right, and then there were longer deadlines too. Something about 180 and 280 days.
Correct. Those deadlines deal with something called categorical exclusions under NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act. The Interior and Agriculture Secretaries were told to consider, and if they thought it was appropriate, adopt new ones, specifically for timber production, forest management, and wildfire risk reduction activities. It even names two, one for timber thinning and reestablishing one for timber salvage activities.
Okay, categorical exclusion. That sounds like government speak again. Can you break that down for us? What is it in simple terms, and why is it such a big deal for this order?
Yeah, it's a key piece of bureaucratic machinery, but the concept is fairly simple. Think of it like an express lane or a space at an amusement park, like you said.
Okay, I like that analogy.
Under NEPA, federal agencies usually have to do a detailed study, an environmental assessment, or an environmental impact statement before taking an action that could affect the environment. This takes time, sometimes a lot of time and resources, but for certain types of actions that agencies have done many times before and have found, based on experience, usually don't have a significant environmental impact, they can establish a categorical exclusion, or CE.
So it lets them skip the long study.
Essentially, yes. It allows them to bypass the lengthy environmental assessment or impact statement process for those specific, pre-approved categories of actions. So when this order talks about creating new CEs for timber thinning, which is like clearing out smaller trees to reduce forest density and fire risk, or timber salvage, which usually means removing dead or dying trees after a fire or insect outbreak, it's really about cutting the red tape. It's meant to reduce the time and paperwork needed to approve those specific kinds of projects.
So it could make things like post-fire cleanup or forest thinning happen much faster.
That's exactly the goal. The order itself says it wants to use these CEs to reduce unnecessarily lengthy processes and associated costs. It's a tool to streamline approvals for activities the administration wants to encourage.
That fast pass idea really makes it click. Okay, so beyond those specific tasks and deadlines, the order keeps mentioning things like undue delays and undue burden. It seems like there's a broader push against red tape in general. What's the strategy there? How does it try to change the system for getting timber projects done?
You're right. It's not just about ticking off boxes on a timeline. If you look at the bigger picture, this order is definitely aiming for a pretty significant overhaul of administrative hurdles, especially ones linked to environmental rules. It's pushing for system-wide efficiency. Section 3, which is called streamline permitting, is a really broad instruction. It tells all the relevant agencies they have to eliminate, to the maximum extent permissible by law, all undue delays in their permitting processes for timber production.
All agencies. That sounds like a major directive.
It is. It's like telling every single department involved in getting a product out the door to speed up their part. Think about how long it can sometimes take to get permits for, say, building something on your own property. This is applying that kind of hurry-up pressure across the board for timber projects.
And does it just say go faster? Or does it give them tools?
It goes further. That same section, Section 3, also tells agencies to actively look at their existing rules, regulations, orders, policies, whatever they have on the books, and if those things impose an undue burden on timber production, they should suspend, revise, or rescind them. Basically, identify the rules that are seen as slowing things down too much or making timber production too hard, and then change them or get rid of them as long as it's legal to do so.
So actively trimming the rulebook where they think it's hindering timber.
Correct. And then Section 4 gets into some specific legal mechanisms, focusing on the Endangered Species Act again, but in a different way. It talks about the Endangered Species Committee and using emergency consultations. This part is pretty interesting. It directs agencies to use emergency regulations under the ESA, again, to the maximum extent permissible under applicable law, specifically to help timber production move forward.
Emergency regulations. That sounds serious.
It suggests using provisions already in the law that allow for faster decisions in urgent situations. It signals they want to use every available legal tool to speed things up.
And you mentioned the Endangered Species Committee. I think I've heard that called the God Squad sometimes. Why bring that up?
You're right. That's the informal nickname. It gets that name because this committee has the very rare and powerful authority to grant exemptions to the Endangered Species Act. Essentially, it can allow a project to go ahead even if it's determined it would jeopardize the existence of a listed species or destroy its critical habitat. It's seen as a last resort, a really high-stakes decision.
Wow. So what does the order say about them?
It tells the Secretary of the Interior, who chairs that committee, to make sure that any requests for these exemptions related to timber are reviewed promptly and efficiently, aiming to resolve them even before the standard deadlines set by the ESA. It also directs the federal members of that committee to actively identify obstacles that timber infrastructure projects face because of the ESA and to recommend ways to improve the process.
So it's really pushing hard on using existing, sometimes powerful legal tools to clear the path for timber.
That's the clear message. Whether it's emergency provisions or the exemption process, the order emphasizes using these avenues to accelerate decisions, particularly in situations like, say, after a big wildfire where quick salvage logging might be desired, or where forest health projects are deemed urgent. It's about proactively finding and removing barriers within the system.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, these orders usually have some standard legal language at the end, right? The sort of fine print. What does Section 5, the general provisions, say? What does this order not do?
Yes, those are important caveats. Section 5 includes the standard legal boilerplate you often see, and it sets some boundaries. First, it clarifies that the order doesn't take away any legal authority from other government departments or agencies or their heads. It also doesn't interfere with the functions of the Office of Management and Budget, OMB.
So it's not a power grab from other parts of the government.
Right. It's supposed to operate within the existing legal structure of who's responsible for what. Second, and this is a big practical point, it says the order has to be implemented consistent with applicable law and subject to the availability of appropriations. Meaning two things. Agencies can only do what the law already allows them to do. This order doesn't grant new fundamental powers. And critically, they need money from Congress to do these things. If Congress doesn't provide the funding, the appropriations for a specific action mandated by the order, well, it might not happen, or at least not quickly.
Money talks, even for executive orders.
Always. And finally, there's a really important clause for anyone listening. It states the order is not intended to and does not create any right or benefit, enforceable at law or in equity by any party.
Okay, what does that mean for, say, an environmental group or a logging company?
It means they can't go to court and sue the government just based on this executive order. It doesn't create new legal rights for individuals or groups to enforce its provisions through lawsuits. It's primarily an internal directive telling the executive branch how to operate. These are essentially the guardrails ensuring the order stays within its legal lane.
Got it. So we've taken a pretty thorough deep dive into this Executive Order 13225, immediate expansion of American timber production. It's definitely a significant document.
It really is. We've seen how clearly it frames the perceived problem that federal policies have held back timber production and argues for boosting it for economic reasons, for jobs, lower costs, and even for wildfire safety. And then it lays out that very detailed roadmap, hitting multiple agencies with specific tasks and tight deadlines, all aimed at streamlining regulations and getting more timber flowing from federal lands.
Yeah, from pushing for faster environmental reviews under the ESA to completing specific consultations like the white bark pine one, setting actual sales targets in board feet, and using tools like categorical exclusions and even emergency powers is a multi-pronged push. It definitely aims to change how federal lands are managed when it comes to timber. It's a really clear example of how a president can use an executive order to try and quickly pivot federal policy.
And the potential impacts ripple out, don't they? From the health of the forests themselves, to the cost of lumber you might buy, to jobs in rural communities, and of course, the ongoing debate about conservation.
Absolutely. This deep dive really highlights how connected everything is. An order focused on timber touches the economy, the environment, community safety. It's all intertwined. It really makes you think about that ongoing tension, that balance between using resources like timber and protecting the environment for the long haul. What aspect of that particular balancing act, especially after digging into this order, sticks out most to you?